Okay, you guys are on here.
Okay. Welcome to the Voice of Reason. I'm Dr. Len Saputo here, and I want to thank you for joining us. We have a really good show tonight. I have a very special friend on tonight that I've known for 25 years, who is one of the most talented people and most experienced people when it comes to philosophy and how the universe works. I could say it that way. It's Chief Black Horse. His name is Philip Scott, and he has done work in many different areas. It's not just Native American medicine, which is what we're going to focus on from the perspective of tonight, but also is trained in Tibetan Buddhism, Taoism, has had years of training at Purdue University in philosophy, neuroscience, animal behavior. And we're going to look at some of the issues of what's happening in the world today, because we've got some challenges in front of us that are really kind of dire, at least in the eyes of most people. Although when I look at it as, yes, it's a challenging time, but it's a time of opportunity, which will help us to face some of the challenges we're having. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to Philip Scott. Philip, thank you so much for being here. Maybe you could tell us a little about yourself, in your own words.
So, well, it's a pleasure to be with you this evening, Len, and it's been quite a while, and so I'm honored to be able to speak with you and your audience and share. So as you rightly pointed out, I'm Philip Scott. I'm known as Shulkawakan Sapa, which is Lakota for Black Horse. I'm a ceremonial leader in the Lakota tradition, as well as a Native American church, and a practitioner of traditional indigenous medicine. And I have devoted my entire life to the integration of this medicine into the world. And I have an institute known as Ancestral Voice, Institute for Indigenous Lifeways in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Right. Well, thank you for that. And I thought it might be appropriate if you would start this out with some way to introduce people to your tradition with a song or with a prayer.
Yes, it's always traditional for us before we dive into the discussion and sharing of sacred matters to invoke the ancestors. And so I will sing a sacred song from my tradition.
Thank you. Thank you, Philip. Can you tell us a little about what that meant?
Well, actually, for me, it's a prayer song. You know, it's actually invoking the Tunkashalas, the ancestors, the Creator, to hear our prayers and to have mercy and pity and compassion upon us at this time.
Right.
And I believe that, you know, currently that is really what we require.
Well, you're right, and thank you for that. I'm wondering how you are dealing with some of the issues that we're facing in the world now. It looks like there's an economic collapse. This COVID-19 issue is really influencing our lifestyle in a way that's huge. And I have my own ways of looking at it, and I've been talking about it for a few weeks now on this show. And I'm curious to know what your perspective is on that and how you've processed it.
Well, I tend not to process things because for me, that's with the mind, and
Okay.
so, indigenous people, we tend to live from the heart and from the spirit.
Hmm.
I think it's important for your listening audience to understand and viewing audience that this moment has been prophesized. The indigenous peoples, the visionaries and the dreamers, and many different, various indigenous cultures have foreseen this time of our unsustainable and destructive trajectory as a species upon this planet.
Mm.
And they also provided dire warnings, which we have not heeded. Now obviously people like Al Gore and Greta Thunberg have uh, attempted also to reach people to uh, make them aware of the global catastrophe that we are currently encountering. And yet before these individuals, indigenous, visionaries and seers have been prophesizing and seeing this for quite some time.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to understand that the prevailing rhetoric in the world now amongst politicians and pundits and even in the healthcare industry now is that we are at war and that this is an invisible terrorism. And frankly, this virus has emerged as an elder and a teacher, right? So indigenous people respect our elders, and this virus and other viruses are billions of years old on this earth. Therefore, they too are our elders and our teachers. So this virus has emerged not to wage war, but rather this is our wake-up call. This is our teaching. And essentially what is being taught to us is the revelation of the glaring inequities and disparities and imbalances that plague our world, that are at the foundation of many of our societies. And so this is our opportunity to remember our original instructions as a species, which is namely to be loving, responsible stewards and protectors of our mother, the earth, and all of our relations upon her. And this is what I see is the important step for us, that this has been a collective initiation and purification and awakening for us.
Yeah, I see it that way too. And it's such a brilliant way of looking at things because we have been so much engaged with thinking of ourselves. It's like we're separate from everything else. It's about I, me, my, and mine. And when we're in that position, we don't form community. We don't have respect for the things around us. It's all about what we can get in a narcissistic way that doesn't serve us well and doesn't serve the planet well. So we need to take this time to wake up, and we've been given enough of a challenge that if we don't do something different, we're not going to survive. The Mother Earth will always survive, but those that live upon it may not.
Well, that's the other portion of the prophecy. So it's not just a matter of seeing the unsustainable trajectory, but also that there are pragmatic antidotes to the current crises that we are in. Mm-hmm. And that involves really dismantling some of these systemically dysfunctional structures in place. And this has really been revealed as a result of this teacher and this virus. But also, we've been afforded the opportunity to deeply dream and reevaluate our relationships and perhaps posit a different future. Right? But even the continuous rhetoric around warfare creates still more of an adversarial relationship with the natural world that you speak of, right? Yeah. This division and this separation, rather than seeing the interconnected relationship of all of creation.
Yeah. We get so immersed in science, which is reductionistic, and we're trying to understand everything. And what a lot of us, most of us don't realize is that the answers are all there already. And all we have to do is connect with, I call it connect with spirit. You call it connect with ancestors. And I have found that the the things I need to know about how to run my life so that I can find peace and joy and love from it is to just listen. And it comes in the dream world. It's the same dream world I think that you talk about. And I know that your experiences with the dream world have been so profound, and that they began when you were only 6 years old, and that you had a calling at that time. And that's what led you to change your whole life and follow the way of the red man.
Yep. Following the red road, exactly.
Well, it's a beautiful thing. And if we could all wake up to this lesson that's being offered, there's the possibility that we could actually change. We have to evolve as we do that. I think the problem is we tend to look at ways to revolt, to have revolution, which means revolve around the same kinds of things that don't change much. And what we need is to evolve to a higher level of consciousness so that we can begin to act in a different way and behave in a different way, and look at things in a holistic manner, which is quite the reverse of science. We put so much trust and faith in the science of the world, even though science and spirituality must and are required to be organized in a perfect way. They don't contradict themselves ever. They have to be synchronized and perfect. We destroy that in our effort to study science the way we do, and wind up with information that's wronged by conflicts of interest and trying to control things rather than to be present and be with the whole universe. It's a sacred thing.
Fundamentally, there's a resistance and fear to change.
Yes.
And that's why we have continued to put up roadblocks to even making the most fundamental adjustments in order to preserve future generations upon this earth. As you rightly said, Mother Earth is going to outlive us, right? Mm-hmm. Civilizations have come and gone.
Yes.
But the reality is, what do we regard as our collective legacy? How will the other species that also exist on this planet regard us? What is the, shall we say, history of our presence upon this earth? And that is an important legacy for us to consider for the future generations. And so I believe that it's also therefore important to understand that indigenous people have a science as well, but it's a science of relationship. And so
that's beautiful.
Rather than, certainly the, shall we say, the Western colonial methodology of science is, as you said, a reductionistic one. But indigenous people have been living for thousands upon thousands of years on this planet in harmony and balance with their environments. And so that too is a science. And so it's based upon observation and reevaluation and adjustments as well. And so it's really about pulling ourselves out to embrace what's more regarded as systems theory now, which for me, that's kind of the one element of indigenous science. And so it's really based upon the experience of interrelationship and interconnectivity.
Yeah, quite different than, as you say, deifying the mind. You've taught me so much over the years with your approach to seeing how the world works, that it's been a stepping stone for me to get involved with the idea of how science, spirituality, and medicine coexist, because they do. And one of the things that I've discovered is that the perfection that's in the universe is mind-boggling. It happens in a way that's not by chance, it's by design. And if we realize that and we respect it and we get out of our heads and stop trying to master it and control it and just be with it, things would be a lot different. I love the idea of the village, of the trying to support the whole of the people that are part of it. And the weakest link of that village is what we need to spend the most time to try and correct things. And now that we're in a place where the culture is really suffering because of our divisiveness, and we're being separated even more so by what's happening with COVID-19 and the things that are related to it, We're now restricted to our homes. We aren't allowed to go out without potential things that will be serious. We don't have the ability to choose the treatments that we want for ourselves, because the government that's controlling all this is doing it with an ulterior motive that is not so easy to figure out. Although when you start putting the pieces of the puzzle together, it starts to give a picture that looks pretty grim. So if we don't wake up now and start being understanding, or knowing, I should use the word knowing, that we are one and that we should operate that way, we'll have a lot more peace and love and community, which is what I think our lives are about, is how to build that, how to find what we knew once, how to remember that's the way we should be living if we're going to be living lives that are fulfilling.
Mhm. Personally, I do not employ the word perfection, but I use the word harmony and balance. And
I like that.
so for me, that is that is the state of the world, the state of the earth and the universe.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also potential and intrinsic within all of us as well, to have that level of awareness of community as well.
Mm-hmm.
I see the sheltering and the sequestration as an initiation. In our traditional ceremonies, we have what's known as the hamblecha, which is Lakota for crying for a dream. And it's where an individual will fast from food and water and sleep up to 4 days and 4 nights, petitioning the ancestors and the creator and the earth for vision and dream about how to walk a good life and how to be of service to others. And so this, for me, I see this as kind of an initiation for all of us collectively at this time, as we're all being afforded the opportunity to go within and to evaluate our relationships. And I really don't see this virus necessarily as a divisive force, but rather it's a unifying one. We may be restricted in terms of our ability to be in close proximity to one another. So physical intimacy is potentially compromised or affected. However, for me, this opens up doorways of communication and intimacy through our feelings, our emotions, our spirit, as well as our intellects. And so we're being asked to stretch here as a species. And for me, there's tremendous blessings that can come, provided we're willing to change and to be flexible and malleable, and to work together in solidarity as a species. I truly believe that this is an opportunity for us to dream and create a more just, equitable, peaceful, loving, balanced, and respectful world.
We've learned to live in an asphalt jungle. We live inside. We don't get sunlight. We've restricted our lives to doing things that are making money. And it seems like money and power are the ideal goals that we have in our mind for what's successful. And it couldn't be further from the truth. If you think of the way that your answers are our ancestors, they're not just yours. Our ancestors lived. It was different. We were connected to the world. We had great respect, especially in the Native American tradition, for the things that we had to do to survive. The respect that we had during killing of a buffalo, for example, it's such a precious kind of connecting thing where you appreciate the sacrifice of the animal's life. It's a way that we need to return. We need to return to the past to find a future that has something that embraces the principles of what we all know, but we have let slip away from us. So in the divisiveness of how the world is today, we need to make a change. And the things that you say are so inspiring to me. It's like beautiful poetry, Philip. I just appreciate what you say.
Well, thank you, Len. I appreciate your appreciation, and I'm grateful also for the great work and, more importantly, the openness and receptivity that you have to understanding that there are many ways. There's a multiplicity of ways. And so we also can learn to accept the differences in our perspectives, and to really see also the fundamental unifying forces of our collective humanity, right? And how we can really come together for a future that we can humbly ask the spirits to help us to dream.
Yeah.
This is the shall we say, the rich potentiality that we have.
Yeah. Well, we learn the lessons of separation the hard way. And the beauty of all this is that we're not separate. We can't be separate. There's no way to be separate. We can only imagine that we're separate. And that imagination is not the kind of imagination that brings peace and happiness. And so through the lessons of despair, we learn those lessons. And as I look back at the Native American way, I just think of how civilized that was and is. And I'm so disappointed that the natives of so many different civilizations and countries of the world have been ignored. In fact, they've been destroyed in some ways. It's a terrible thing that we have to go backwards to be able to go forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, as we proceed forward, I think, I am uncertain about where, the county that you're residing in, but, there's this actually global movement toward expansion now, right? As we begin to, as the sheltering in place orders are being rescinded. Yeah. And so it's important for us to be very wise and intelligent, and to return to normal is problematic, because it's this normalcy that we've had, which has been part of the domestication and the sleep. Yeah. And so we need to glean the good medicine and the wisdom from the ways that our ancestors lived in harmony and balance with the earth. Yeah. And to move forward in this modern age, but not by reinforcing this illusion of independence. Yeah. Rather, this is about interdependence, and about how we can support one another to create far more just and egalitarian societies.
Well, that's so right. And I'm wondering how you would use your traditional Native American wisdom. What advice would you give to people, and what techniques might be of value that are in the Native American way? And do you offer that in your teaching?
Well, the indigenous way is a way of life. And within the matrix of this way of life is the medicine and the wisdom how to learn to live in balance and harmony with one another, with all of our relations and the earth, as well as the source, the ancestors. Yeah. You can't even separate the teachings from this way of life. And so infused in this way of life is the keys to living in balance, in harmony.
Yeah. Well, when people come to you at Ancestral Voice for healing, how do you go about that? I'm very curious.
Well, it may be that, for example, I have an individual who contacts me by phone or email or text or any number of possible ways of connecting, also with Facebook, requesting a healing. And so I may speak with them in advance to get an idea of their purpose and intent for meeting with me. And then I will go into prayer, and if it's not an emergent situation, may ask for some time to receive a dream and instruction from the helping spirits and the source and the earth to receive guidance on how to proceed for this doctoring, this healing that has to take place. Mm-hmm. And then the individual will show up on the specified time and date, and they're greeted and cleansed off with sacred medicines, and then more songs are sung and prayers are expressed, and we talk story, and to really solidify more of the intention. And then based upon the instructions I have received, or from information I'm receiving in the moment from the ancestors and the spirits of the altar, then we will serve this individual and address the totality of this individual, body, mind, heart, and spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And there's many different methodologies outside the scope of this conversation that we can employ.
Yeah. Well, I remember having some experiences with you years ago. We've known each other for probably close to 25 years now. And it took me a few years to listen to you so that I could hear some of the messages you had. And I tried doing some sweat lodges with you. And I found it very interesting because in that sweat lodge, there's a way of forcing trance, really. For me, when I got into the sweat lodge, I thought, oh, this is going to be fun. It'll be nice and warm in there too. And as I got in there and the heat built, I could see that I was beginning to panic because I was so hot that I thought I'd bolt for the door. But at the time that I was doing this particular sweat lodge with you, it was the beginning of a Yuwipi ceremony, which is a healing ceremony for people who are ill. And we had two children. One had pyloric stenosis and the other had neutropenia, diseases which weren't getting any other treatment, and they were in trouble. And as I got into that sweat lodge and felt this horrible heat, I was going to bolt for the door. And yet at that moment, it occurred to me, why are you here? What's the point of this? And at that moment, I went into a trance that was obviously very deep. It was analogous to being able to walk on coals from the point of view barefooted, which I have done, which is something that brings you into a place of deep focus and concentration. And what I realized is that I was there for those children, and it was supposed to be in prayer. And I did that. And you kept this thing going for 2 hours. And during that 2 hours, I was not that hot. I was centered and focused on what was happening. And then when you open the doors and I felt the heat again, and because I had broken the trance, I couldn't wait to get out. And what that was transformative to me and taught me about what you can do when your intention is set and you have a purpose for being there that is good. And a lot of the Native American approaches, the Sundance and the Yuwipi ceremony itself, are expressions of that really encourage and make it easier. It's always simple, but it's never really easy because it's quite an achievement it was for me to be able to appreciate those things. So I thank you for that, because it taught me something that made me a different person and able to endure more for the community and to pray for the benefit of other entities than myself. Quite a lesson.
Now, the Purification Lodge is the native hospital. It's where the spirits can doctor individuals. And of course, then we have the Yuwipi and the Sundance, which are also high ceremonies that involve also doctoring and medicine. And you bring up a really important point, which is really at the ground of the awareness of interconnectivity and interrelationship.
Yes.
That we're talking about the capacity to sacrifice for others.
Exactly.
To be able to endure perhaps a little bit of heat to assist.
It was bloody hot. It was hot when I wasn't in trance and when I wasn't focused in the right place, and it wasn't hot when I wasn't, or when I wasn't.
So heat is a relative phenomenon.
Yeah.
However, the most important thing that you also bring up is that when we are focused, right, then as we continue creating conflict, if we think about how difficult it is, then it becomes more difficult, right? So when your awareness is shifted, because every single ceremony allows for a shift of awareness, which allows and facilitates communion and communication with the unseen and with the earth in a more profound kind of level. So it's opening ourselves up, to have unfettered communion and connection. And as a consequence of that, there is more intent and focus. So we're not affected by the heat. We're not affected by the piercing of the flesh in the Sundance, for example,
Right.
because we're in a state of prayer and in a state of sacrifice and
Mhm.
service to all of our relations.
It's a beautiful thing to be focused in a direction that's productive and that is meaningful. I found out some time ago that my purpose in life is largely about development of building the development of community, and I did that in medicine by developing the Health Medicine Forum back in the early '90s, because I knew that by myself I was in a profession as an MD
Mhm.
where everything was tilted in my favor as far as payment was concerned, as far as trust is concerned, and my goal was to learn more about what I didn't know that the other disciplines offered. And we used to have what we call show and tell, you probably remember, where people would talk about a wide range of different things that they could do. There are so many different disciplines that we tend not to appreciate if they're not ours. And I'd say that happens with most disciplines, and beginning to develop an open mind so that you can appreciate that there are other ways to do things, and they can be done in a way that's building community rather than building separation. We are so focused on ourselves and our independent benefits, we call them, things that are, quotes, the luxuries of life, that are really the doom of humanity, because we tend to deify those things as the most important things in life. So I don't think that we've got our priorities straight. And maybe COVID-19 is teaching us something about that, a chance to reorganize our thinking, to start to thinking about what you can do for your community rather than what your community can do for you. And that's the Native American lesson, the biggest one that comes to mind, that I've learned from you. And I thank you for that.
My pleasure. At the conclusion of my song this evening, I shared the word and the phrase mitakwie oyasin, which is Lakota for all of my relations.
Mm.
And so that's a fundamental understanding within literally the cells of every body that we are connected to all of creation. And in fact, if we look at the origin stories of every single civilization on the planet,
Yeah.
human beings were the last to be created, not the first. Therefore, we are the youngest beings on this planet, and so are regarded as the grandchildren. And we have the most to learn from our elders,
Yeah.
who, in this case, first are the elementals, earth, air, fire, water, which are living, sentient beings. And then come the viruses and the bacteria, and the plants and the animals. All of these beings are regarded as our elders, whom we can learn from when we are humble enough to listen and to be open to the teachings.
Yeah. Well, when we get tired enough of being chopped up, and by that I mean by suffering, because so much of life is about suffering, and it's how we use that suffering to gain wisdom through our experience. And when we get that, it can change the way that we behave. I can see that throughout my life, things have changed a great deal in terms of how I see myself in relation to other people and to my ancestors. So it's a beautiful thing to have this wisdom and to be able to accept that, and to know that we're a whole humanity, and that there's a holistic aspect to that that is binding. I look at that as binding. And yet there's a holistic concept that goes beyond that. There's the concept of the holism of the earth, or the holism of the universe, or the cosmos, and possibly even beyond that. And when I get into a deep meditative state and I'm not thinking and I'm just feeling or just being present, I'm sentient and receptive. I'm curious to see what's going to unfold, to what I'm going to notice, and see if there's anything that comes from that that will help me to learn that lesson in a deeper way. And for me, that's how levels of community and levels of holism, if you will, it's sort of an oxymoron to look at it that way, because there's only one holism, and that's everything. And so I look at my relationship with spirit, my spirituality, which extends to everything that I think exists. At least that's my perception of it. How do you see it?
Well, as you mentioned about suffering, it really is a gateway for awakening, because we're going to experience impermanence on this planet. There are things that are going to pass from this world. And so, as a result of our suffering, we are touched by grief. And grief is one of the most profound teachers that we have.
Yes, indeed.
And so, as a consequence of this grief, we can awaken to a deeper level of compassion for the collective suffering of this planet. And so, it's important for us to embrace the grief that we're going to experience. And as a result of this virus, there has been an experience of grief that many people have touched into, whether it be the loss of a loved one from the infection of this virus, the loss of one's income, the loss of perception of freedom, for example, of mobility. You know, all of these things have caused us to experience levels of grief, which again can be our springboard for awakening.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, you mentioned about community, and I think it's important to understand that we are born into community. We are born into relationship from the moment we arrive from the gateway of the womb.
Yeah.
And that's the fundamental part. But unfortunately, in the Western colonized world, there's been such a concentration upon the individual at the expense of family and society and community. And that's what's been causing this fracturing and the separation actually from the very earth herself.
Yes, indeed.
And so personally, I think it's important for us to move beyond concepts. People talk about theories and ideas, even about the sentience of the earth, but rather she is a living, sentient, breathing organism. Indeed. And this, you know, for me, the indigenous way is a lived experience. It's direct experience. And so we move beyond theories and concepts and ideas into actual, the wisdom that is derived from our direct experience.
Boy, that's beautiful. I look at it that way too. I feel inspired by the things that are given to me. I get these ideas that turn out to be sometimes really good ideas, and I'm wondering, where do they come from? Is that me that's thinking that up? And then who am I? A good question to ask. And my conclusion is that there are gifts that are given when the time is right by the universe, by the creator of the universe, that allows us to do the things that we're capable of doing to make the world a better place. And if we learn to trust that and to embrace it, the work that we do becomes easier, and it begins to flow, and it becomes something that we are part of an aspect of a greater whole, because we're not separate. The word part implies separation. There is no separation in the deepest level. And yet it's an interesting duality that we have, because as we live our lives, all too often we remember the separation part and we become competitive and adversarial. And yet in the moments that are our greatest joy, we're more focused on the connection and the sacrifice that can be given at quotes, our expense, but it's our opportunity to help someone else, or to help another group or another species or another anything, because we're all joined and are made of one essence of being. And to me, that's a beautiful way to be. And I've learned more about that because of you and your philosophy.
Rather than embracing a competitive paradigm, I think it's important that we begin to see a collaborative and cooperative one.
Exactly.
Because that's really the way that the universe and the natural world operate. It's not, you know, it's actually undermining this notion of Darwinian evolution into, you know, the survival of the fittest, for example, which is kind of the ground of a lot of our economics and our politics, but rather to see a much more interrelated, communal, meaning collaborative journey
Yeah.
together.
Well, look what's happened to us. We're not any longer a democracy, we're an economy. And it's built on corruption because of the separation. We now have a Congress that votes one way. The Republicans all vote one way, the Democrats all vote another way. And somehow that's supposed to reflect that they're all thinking. And I don't see how that's even possible with that happening. And the corporate America has purchased Congress. Certainly when it comes to healthcare back in 2009, when we're looking at healthcare reform and we're going to have the change we need, and Obama was leading the way, and we're all excited about what was going to happen. As I look back over what did happen, I don't think there was ever a time when they intended to provide universal health care at all. And I wrote a paper on that. And sometime I'll do a show on that, because I think it will open our eyes to see that there are ulterior motives out there with people that are wolves in sheep's clothing that make things look really good, and they're undermining who we are. They're undermining our democracy and our community. We need to go back to the future if we're going to find these things. And unfortunately, the suffering is immense, and that's why we're at a precipice now. I think it's a huge crossroads that we're at this time, where it looks like there is so much being made up about what this virus is doing. And I hate to use this approach because I know it has limitations, but it also has some practical aspects to it too. As long as we're hung up on the virus and what it's doing, we're going to miss the bigger picture of its value from source. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting way of looking at things. There are different ways to see it.
Well, you mentioned so every single individual is sovereign and yes, is endowed with the capacity to remember his or her original instructions. And these original instructions are something that we are here to discover. And these original instructions have to do with selfless service for the collective, right? And that's part of our journey. And again, we also, as I mentioned, have original instructions as a species, which is to serve as loving protectors and stewards of this earth and all of our relations upon her. Yeah. And so this is the impulse that we have. Now, when you spoke about my phrase of deifying the mind. Yes. The Western colonized mind is predicated on polarity. Right? We have this subject-object duality. Yes. And as a consequence of this duality and polarization, we see this polarization in our world, whereas other indigenous languages tend not to be caught in polarities and duality because it's not based upon the perceiver and the perceived, which is a way of separation perceptually. Yes. And so as a consequence of this, that's why we see this illusion of separation and duality in the world, because of the very fabric and structures of our mind and thinking and language. Yeah. And we're born into it in a way, because look at the culture we were born into. For me, being born in the 40s, there was a lot, life was different then. There was more community. And as we developed more in terms of economics, we became more of an economy. And then it became about wealth and separation. And unfortunately, that's predicated how things have gotten out of hand. So I think, like you do, that the gift that we were offered with COVID-19 and seeing all the things that have unfolded because of it and how they've been manipulated by different factions of our government is a wake-up call. It's a chance to be able to give more of yourself and to join in with those that you can help. I found it a great pleasure to be a doctor. When I went to medical school to start with, boy, I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and I couldn't wait to go out and help people and make them feel better. And then I went through all the training that I went through to do that for the next 12 or so years. And what I learned was how to do things to people
and to get them back on their feet and back to work. But I didn't learn hardly anything about why they got sick or what should be done, what could be done to prevent that from happening again, because there's always a message in what happens. And if we listen to it, just as we can listen to what's happened with COVID-19 and seeing everything being stripped away that we think is or a lot of things stripped away of what we think is of value, then we have the great opportunity of learning and becoming wiser and having the wisdom to be able to do it in a different way. So it's like a gift. It's a wake-up call. It says, look what you're doing. Do you really want to do this? Are you happy with that things have turned out the way they are? Are you going to continue this way because you're having such a good time? Wow.
I think for me, part of wisdom has to do with humility.
Oh, yes, indeed.
And so it's being able to honestly evaluate oneself, our collective trajectory. So one of the hallmarks of a practitioner of traditional indigenous medicine from native cultures around the world is that the practitioner never takes credit for the healing.
Of course.
That it's the spirits that do the doctoring, not the individual.
Of course.
And there's a humbling that goes on. So there's not this elevation of the individual. That it's because they're not the one that's doing the healing or the doctoring. And so as a consequence, credit is given to the powers and the medicines that be of the spirits and the plants that are being utilized for the healing.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of the Western colonized world is there's such a focus upon self-absorption and self-importance, yes, rather than humility and being able to honestly track oneself, yeah, and in particular to examine the patterns. I use the word addiction, yeah, and there's truly an addiction to oneself besides the substances that we have and the distractions that we have. Yeah. And so the key for us moving forward as a species is not about rhetoric, it's about action, and removing the obstacles to those actions, which for me is the ground of healing, modifying, altering our behaviors so that we're not riddled with addictions, which is a form of slavery. Yeah. And so it's looking at the ground of the way that our worlds often work in the colonized world, which is all predicated on enslavement of some form or shape.
So how does fear fit into all this? Because I feel it's integrally involved with all of this, with addictions and with our ways of being subservient, and it defines a lot of our behavior. How do you see fear fitting into this?
Well, fears are gateways. And so for an individual who embarks on a sacred path, there's going to be fears that arise because those fears are a part of the conditioning of our humanity. These fears can come from society and comes from our families. And so fears are false evidence appearing real. That's one of the acronyms anyway. The other is F everything and run. Beautiful. Right. That's beautiful. And so these fears are forms of paralysis and blindness. Yeah. And so they can become gateways because, as the word I use is awakened warriors, right? Individuals that are willing to cultivate the courage to embrace their fears, then they're able to liberate themselves from these illusions, yeah, so that they can cultivate greater clarity. And through this clarity, we can act. So, the fears that arise also become the springboards for action when we're able to release the paralysis and the blindness that is associated with these fears and these illusions. And so it becomes a gift, provided we don't get stuck or attached to the fears themselves.
Yeah.
So again, the awakened warrior is going to cultivate the courage to confront the fears that arise so that they no longer have a hold upon that individual. So we become less and less accessible to fear over time,
Yeah.
and therefore are not crippled by it.
Yeah. I've seen, I think it may have been from you that I've heard this, so I'll just ask you. The warrior who is going into battle has a fear of death, but not really. And so, if I recall this right, that there is a practice that the warriors do where they face death every morning in their minds so that they won't be hindered or crippled by it. Is that true?
Well, warriors actually, my experience of awakened warriors is that they do not have a fear of death at all.
Right. That's what
Because they've actually reconciled the reality that there is no life without death, right? That
Right.
it's this dance. And
Yeah.
so death is actually the galvanizing force in the warrior's life so that they can act impeccably and with integrity moment to moment because they know they don't have a tomorrow.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. Well, I could talk to you for hours, and maybe we have already. I want to let people know that you have this Ancestral Voice Institute for Indigenous Lifeways. You have a phone number for that, Philip, that you can pass along?
Yes, so individuals can contact me at 415-310-0981, 415-310-0981. They can also email me at Philip with 2 L's at ancestralvoice.org. We also have a Facebook page, and yeah, I'm very honored to be of service to anyone on your call. We are conducting ceremonies and continuing to receive people for healings, as well as part of stretching, doing more Zoom calls and healings as well.
Yeah. Well, I just want to let our listeners or our viewers know that we worked together for a few years at the Health Medicine Institute, and we had about 15 practitioners there, and you were one of them. And I learned so much, and so did the other practitioners, about what's really involved with healing. It's not just, it's like you said, we're as doctors, we don't do the healing. What we do is, if we get out of the way, a lot of the time we can let nature take its course and do what we can to support that process. So I want to thank you very much for spending the time with us. I hope people will know my full endorsement of you. I think you're one of the greatest healers that I've known. And it's been a pleasure to know and work with you because of that. So thank you one more time, Philip. And thank you, our listeners. Tomorrow night, we're going to have another show with Beverly Rubik, where we're going to be looking at the interrelationship of COVID-19 with 5G. And Bev is a physicist, a biophysicist who graduated from UC Berkeley and has published probably 150 papers. She has a unique understanding of physics and how those relationships might have something to do with what's happening. So one more time, thank you, Philip. And
well, I'm very honored. I'm very honored by your acknowledgement of my prowess and my skill, although I need to give credit to the ancestors and the spirits that work, with this altar. And yeah, I look forward to further conversations down the road and more connection with you. And also, I didn't mention that individuals can also go to our website, which is www.ancestralvoice.org as well, if they need more information. So it's been an honor to share with you, Len, and I wish you many blessings and all of your listeners and viewers that they can remain healthy and safe and remain open to their dreams at this time, for us to dream a future that all of our relations are depending upon and counting us on.
Well, brother, until we meet again.
Indeed.
All right.
Aho, Mitako Yasi.